Many people say that there is a mountain of evidence for evolution.
Should Christians just cave and admit that Genesis is a myth? Stay tuned on Creation Magazine Live. Hello, I'm Calvin Smith.
And I'm Richard Fangrad.
And today we're going to be talking about how, many people say that evolution is a fact. It's just presented that way on many TV shows and things like that. But it's interesting that even the most prominent, probably evolutionist today, the most popular evolutionist, Richard Dawkins,
Yes.
has admitted that evolution hasn't been observed, which is kind of what science is based on. He was on Bill Moyer's show Now in 2004. And Moyers asked him a very interesting question. He said, Richard, is evolution a theory, not a fact? And Richard Dawkins responded and said, evolution has been observed, it's just that it hasn't been observed while it's happening.
Awesome.
So what he's admitted here is nobody's ever observed evolution. If you believe in evolution, it's a faith position, because it's not like empirical science where you can say, well, let's do an experiment and we can observe the results in real time, that kind of thing.
Right, and he's made other similar quotes like this one here.
Right.
Nobody has actually seen evolution take place over a long period, but they have seen the after effects. And the after effects are massively supported. It is like a case in a court of law where nobody can actually stand up and say, I saw the murder happen, and yet you've got millions and millions of pieces of evidence which no reasonable person can possibly dispute.
Right. So here you've got three situations, or three times he's emphasized. Okay, first he said, yeah, it's been observed, but not when it's happening. Then he admits nobody's actually seen evolution take place.
Right.
Then he says it's like a case in a court of law where nobody can actually stand up and say, I saw the event
crime.
happen.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
3 times in a row, Dawkins has admitted it hasn't been observed. Now, what he's saying, of course, is that, yeah, but when you look at all the evidence, it just points to evolution. But the thing we try to emphasize is those pieces of evidence which he's saying all point to evolution can be interpreted different ways.
Yes,
right?
and we say that in many different ways,
Exactly.
all kinds of articles on the website there.
But evolution, it's kind of like this monolith in people's minds, right? It's kind of like this huge, building where people just look at it, wow, evolution's a fact. It's just, along the skyscraper skyline, let's say, of science, evolution is just this thing.
And there's massive evidence in support of evolution. Mountains of evidence is the
Right.
famous phrase that's always used.
And it's been built up over time, like bricks building a building, right? You're going to pile this up on this, and you're going to start with a solid foundation, you're going to build it up, and over time. And so people have this idea that there's this solid evidence for evolution that's been carefully built upon, brick by brick over
Right.
time.
Yeah.
Things like the Archaeopteryx, that's a great intermediate between this lizards and birds, and chimps and humans, they share 98% DNA similarity, and Embryo, similar, all these things, fossils and ape men, and all these bricks, if you just pile them all up, boom, you've got this monolithic structure we can trust.
It all adds up to this massive support for evolution.
Right. Now, many Christians, of course, have been convinced of this because it's presented as fact, right? Many Christians have said, okay, well, we need to accept evolution. And of course, what you do there is you give up biblical authority, because the Bible doesn't talk about evolution, of course. It doesn't talk about millions of years of God creating, millions of years of death and suffering. And we've, of course, emphasized that many times.
So you need to modify the biblical text in order to get in all of this supposed evidence for evolution.
Exactly.
And so, you compromise biblical authority.
Right. So I think one thing people are missing, Dawkins uses this court case analogy. He said, okay, you haven't observed it, but all the evidence points to evolution. The thing is, in a court case, scenario, if we went to observe some kind of proceedings, and we got there, and only one side, only the prosecutor could talk about the evidence. Here's all the evidence everybody's looking at. But the prosecutor's talking about the evidence, but every time the defense goes to mention anything about the evidence, somebody shuts them up. What would you call that kind of court proceeding?
Well, it's a kangaroo court.
Exactly. It's ridiculous,
Yeah.
right? Now, of course, in the Western world, what we're discovering, we're here in Canada. And officially, I like to remind people this, officially in the public school system, in the state school system here in Canada,
Yeah.
what's the only way they explain the question of origins, how we got here?
Yeah, there's one way.
One way, evolution. So of course all the evidence points that way because you can't talk about creation or intelligent design. And of
Yes.
course, recently in the UK, they've actually banned the teaching of creation even in religious education classes.
That's right, yeah.
So
in mid-2012,
Yeah.
they banned, you cannot give the other side of the story. It's like the analogy you just gave.
Right.
You're not allowed to do that.
Exactly.
Amazing.
So we're going to look at this mountain of evidence and see if it stacks up.
You've heard that diamonds are a girl's best friend, but diamonds also teach us an important lesson about the age of the Earth. Diamonds are made of carbon. One rare type of carbon, known as carbon-14, is radioactive, which means that it breaks down over time. By measuring the amount of decay, scientists estimate how old something is. Some people think that carbon-14 dating proves things happened millions of years ago, but that's wrong, because carbon-14 decays so fast that something a million years old could not contain any carbon-14. Geophysicist Dr. John Baumgardner recently investigated the level of carbon-14 in diamonds. Many would have considered such research pointless because the diamonds were supposedly over 1 billion years old, which meant all carbon-14 should have decayed. But the radiocarbon labs detected significant levels of carbon-14, which suggests the diamonds are much younger, only thousands of years.
To find out more from Creation Ministries International, visit our website, creation.com.
Let's look at this mountain of evidence supposedly in support of evolution, which many of our viewers will probably have heard. For example, embryo similarities. Many people have been shown diagrams like this. They'll see them in textbooks and they say, wow, this proves our evolutionary past. Of course, the problem with this is these diagrams were forged by a German scientist, Ernst Haeckel, 140 years ago. Evolutionists have admitted they're complete forgeries. As a matter of fact, in 96, Michael Richardson, an embryologist, published photos, you can see the comparison here, proving once and for all that these are complete frauds, and he admitted these are fakes. He's very offended in some of the quotes you can see when
Yes,
he published
yeah.
his things, and yet they're still in textbooks today. As a matter of fact, in one of the episodes I mentioned that a couple of years ago in my daughter's textbook, in Guelph, Ontario, Canada, there were Haeckel's embryo drawings, but
Yeah.
they've known they're frauds for over 140 years, and still people will say, well, that's solid evidence. But that shouldn't be taken into account at all.
Right, and you can go to creation.com/frauds
Rediscovered.
Frauds rediscovered, and get more information there. Now, another thing we can look at is vestigial organs. This is another brick in that edifice of supposed evidence for evolution. Vestigial organs, these things in our bodies that are supposedly evolutionary leftovers when we used to be something else.
Like your appendix, for example.
Like your appendix, yes. Even in the Encyclopedia Britannica in '97 said this, that the appendix doesn't really serve any useful purpose, but it's gradually disappearing over evolutionary time, over millions of years.
Yeah.
And yet in '97, that wasn't that long ago.
No.
They're still saying that it doesn't have any function. Well, it has lots of functions.
That's right.
It's a very important thing. It's not vestigial at all.
Yeah, and so today, doctors, they're not talking about taking out your appendix because it doesn't have any purpose. It's got many purposes. Right?
So there's another brick in that evolutionary wall that's coming down.
That's right. And even if you discovered an organ that was useless, if it went from being useful to being useless, this is the opposite of what evolution needs to show anyway. So vestigial organs are not a good argument for evolution.
Right.
And you can go to creation.com/vestiges to see more about that. How about the Stanley Miller experiment? Many
Yes.
people will be familiar with this diagram where, Stanley Miller, the Miller-Urey experiment, where basically he took he made some simple organic compounds, right? He kind of zapped a mixture of gases and he formed amino acids. And so many people were saying, oh, this is, we know how first life was created. Of course, you look at the literature today, even in Time Magazine said, well, this textbook picture of how life originated, well, it's probably wrong.
It's probably wrong.
And even Miller himself, admitted, no, this really doesn't show us where life came from at all. As a matter of fact, I wrote an article called Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, where there's a science group down in the United States, a secular science group, offering $1 million to anyone who can come up with a way that DNA could have formed naturally, which is, of course, key to the origin of life. So this Miller-Urey experiment, no, it's not a good evidence
It's
either.
another brick gone.
And you can see it at creation.com/Urey for more information.
Another one is the famous peppered moths. Now, many of you will have heard of the peppered moths, and the story is that they rested on trees, and some were camouflaged, and some weren't, and so on. And you had changes in the population, and that's been hailed, still in textbooks today,
Yep.
as hailed as evidence for evolution.
Right.
And but it doesn't work.
No, this fellow here, Harrison Matthews, he wrote the foreword to one of the Origin of Species.
Right, one of the later editions.
Yeah, and he says it straight out. Well, these experiments beautifully demonstrate natural selection or survival of the fittest, but they do not show evolution in progress.
Yes, and of course natural selection creationists have always accepted.
That's right.
In fact, before Darwin thought of it.
And even evolutionist Jerry Coyne, as a staunch evolutionist, he
Right.
said, well, his reaction to finding out that the prize horse in the Darwinian, evidence is stable, he said it was like finding out that Santa Claus wasn't real. So, peppered moths, not a good evidence for evolution.
Another brick that's gone.
Yeah, you can go see creation.com/peppered for more information there. And things like homology, right? Many people will be familiar with the thought, well, hey, look at these things. Look at this diagram here. Look at the whale. It's got 1 bone, then 2 bones, and 5 digits. Same as humans. But of course, that's really not a good argument for evolution, because when we look at other things like that, we could say, well, look at the unicycle, look at the Porsche. Obviously, an intelligent designer would use similar component parts in a variety of applications.
Right.
This is not proof of evolution. So we're starting to notice something here. When you really look into it, this wall's not looking that good.
No.
Creation Magazine is a 56-page full-color family magazine that is an essential tool for anyone wanting to immunize their family against the anti-biblical worldviews bombarding us from all sides. With no paid advertising, every page is full of powerful articles, ammunition to intelligently discuss nature, history, science, the Bible, and related subjects. Although written for lay people, every effort is made to ensure the content is technically accurate, so that even experts are satisfied. And young children look forward to the section written especially for them. Visit creation.com to get your subscription.
Okay, moving right along with this mountain of evidence for evolution. This is a very fast-paced show. We're just summarizing some of the problems with some of these things.
Right.
And for more information, you need to go to creation.com. Let's move on. Horse evolution, the horse evolution series.
Right.
You still see this in many museums today. This notion that something like a badger gave rise to today's horses.
Right.
Niles Eldridge, Dr. Niles Eldridge, former curator of the American Museum of Natural History, has said things like this. I have to admit, an awful lot has gone into textbooks as though it were true, and he goes on to say, well, it's lamentable that this horse evolution series still appears in museums and in textbooks and so on. So here's, this guy's not a creationist,
No.
right? And he's a curator of a museum, so you would
and he actually
assume-
admits that he thinks people are aware that it's not accurate, and that's why he's saying it's
Yeah,
lamentable.
yeah.
So when people see that horse evolution series, they might want to check out creation.com horse evolution
For more details.
For more details on that. How about just the fossil record itself? Many people just say, well, that's proof of evolution, right?
Yep.
We got fossils, but of course they're forgetting about the Great Flood that's recorded in Genesis 6 to 9.
Which
But
is
anyway,
a perfect mechanism for depositing, for producing a
fossils.
fossil record.
Exactly. Now, of course, Charles Darwin, way back in 1872, he said, well, why isn't the geologic column full of all these intermediate things? And he said, well,
good question.
we'll discover them later on as we look at the fossil record. But then Stephen Gould bump it up to 1977. So there's been lots of research been done there, and Gould himself says, well, the extreme rarity of these transitional forms are a trade secret in paleontology.
So they're still not there.
That's why he came up with this punctuated equilibrium
Yes.
story, a different type of evolution. And then we bump up to 2004 in National Geographic, and they say, well, illuminating but spotty, the fossil record is like a film of evolution from which 999 out of 1,000 frames have been lost.
It'd be hard to get the plot of the movie if you had a movie like that.
So the fossil record does not support evolution, and you can go to creation.com/fossil random and get some more information on, if you've been taught that all this stuff is just laid out that way.
Sure.
Yep.
Dinosaurs. Some people equate dinosaurs so closely with evolution. They say, well, if you Christians, if you believe that there were dinosaurs, then you must believe in evolution.
Right.
And we've run into that. Our speakers run into that
Of course,
from time
because
to time.
even fossilization, right, is taught is that as a process can take
It takes millions of years to fossilize something.
That's right.
And on and on. And yet, Phil Curry, one of the paleontologists associated with the Tyrrell Museum here in Canada, he said in one of his dinosaur books that fossilization is a process that can take anything from a few hours to millions of years.
I wonder which one of those processes he's observed.
Well, he's observed the few hours. He hasn't observed the millions of years. I don't think he's that old, right?
Exactly.
But the science, the observation comes from the few hours. And of course, there's examples, amazing examples, like what you're seeing here, 70 million year old soft tissue in T-Rex bones.
Right.
A dinosaur bone with soft and stretchy tissue, blood vessels and blood cells still there.
Supposedly 60 million years old, 70
Yeah,
million
70
years old.
million years
right?
old, yeah.
And even Dr. Mary Schweitzer, the lady who was a lead scientist on that project, she says, when you think about it, the laws of chemistry and biology and everything that we know say that it should be gone, it should be completely degraded. However, it wasn't just that one time she's found soft tissue.
She's found it repeatedly.
That's right. She found it with a duck-billed dinosaur. How about evidences like stone carvings that look just like dinosaurs we see in dinosaur books?
Yeah, this temple here in Cambodia, there's a, what is that thing?
Obviously, people know it's a stegosaur.
Yes.
I'll get kids shouting that out. So many artifacts where it's been obvious that people and dinosaurs have coexisted. So really, if you're looking for more information on that, go to creation.com/coexist. And dinosaurs aren't a good argument for that either. How about things like Archaeopteryx? There's a specific example, right? When they say
transitional fossil.
Transitional
yes.
fossil. This is the link between dinosaurs and birds, etc. But of course, when you look at the so-called specifics, well, it's got claws on its wings and things like that. Well, things like the Hoatzin, it's a South American bird, and its young have claws. Look very similar to that thing. So you've got bird experts like Dr. Alan Fiducia, who's an evolutionist, no friend to creationists, and he says paleontologists have tried to turn Archaeopteryx into an earth-bound feathered dinosaur, but it's not. It's a bird, a perching bird, and no amount of paleobabble is going to change that. So he's pointed out things like the fact that some of these dinosaur with feather reports that we've seen are actually older than Archaeopteryx, and like he quips, you can't be your own grandmother. So guess what? Archaeopteryx, go to creation.com/birdevo, and you'll find out that that's not a good evidence either.
People with granite benchtops in their kitchens are usually very proud of them, never failing to show them off to visitors. But that's not surprising. Serving up dinner on a surface that was supposedly millions of years in the making carries a certain aura about it. But in a recent paper published in the Proceedings of the Geologists Association, granite specialist John Clemens stated just about everything that was taught as recently as 10 years ago about granitic magmatism has been turned on its head. He then describes how granites can form quickly. He concludes that granites belong with an increasing number of geological processes that were catastrophic in their suddenness. This eliminates yet another reason not to believe the Bible's timescale. While this is certainly a dramatically different view of how granites form, be sensitive when telling your friends with granite benchtops. They might find this research pretty deflating.
To find out more from Creation Ministries International, visit our website, creation.com.
Okay, that wall of evolution evidence is starting to crumble fast. Let's move on. Whale evolution. That's another one of those bricks in the wall, whale evolution.
Yep.
In 1994, Philip Gingrich in Science magazine wrote this: Pachycetus is perfectly intermediate, a missing link between earlier land animals and later full-fledged whales. So we have the ancestor of whales. The thing is, the only bones he found are these. So,
and look at the picture he drew, which was on the cover of the 1983 Science magazine.
Interesting
right?
picture from those two bones. How would you get the rest of the body? But anyways, later, more of the bones of that particular animal was found, and this is what it looked like.
Right.
So
looks like a big rat.
It's
not a whale.
It's not a whale.
They actually referred to this thing as a land cetacean. What does the word cetacean mean? Like a whale, if it's got 4 legs. But anyway,
awesome.
Creation.com/Pachycetus for more about why whale evolution is gone.
All right, what's next?
Tiktaalik. This is
Yes.
the bomb, right?
Made big news.
Richard Dawkins said this is it. It's the perfect missing link. It almost exactly splits the difference between fish and amphibian, and it's perfect because it's missing no longer. This was in his book, The Greatest Show on Earth, as one of the best proofs of evolution. Well, we gave some warning on our website about why that might not be, but then a little while later they found these footprints, and these footprints were 18 million years younger than Tiktaalik, which proves that there were things that were already walking around long before Tiktaalik was. So guess what? Well, here's the kind of...
I mean, according to their dating, we're saying 18 million years older.
We don't agree with that. But within their own framework, it
falls apart.
Yeah, you get quotes like this. They force a radical reassessment of the timing, et cetera, of the fish tetrapod transition. So anybody that accepted that as fact, well, guess what? It's wrong.
Oops.
So there's creation.com, Tiktaalik finished is why you'd find out that that's no longer the perfect transition form.
Nice link. What about the ape men? If we think about the ape men, another brick. Here's Nebraska man, and that was based on what? A single tooth.
A single pig's tooth, right?
And of course, that's many of you have probably heard of this one. A single tooth turns out, it wasn't a human tooth at all. It's a pig's tooth.
Right.
And we've mentioned this many times. Yeah. There's other ape men examples as well.
Piltdown man, for example, 40 years in the textbooks of proof positive that we evolved from this thing, and then they find out it's a complete forgery.
That was actually an outright fraud. Somebody playing a practical joke on someone else.
Right.
And I'd heard that there was 500 PhD theses written on Piltdown Man.
Right. And then it turned out to be a fraud.
Yeah. Lucy is another one.
Right.
They found Lucy, and it's this walking upright ape. It looks very ape-like from the knees up.
Right.
But the thing is, they didn't find its feet.
Right. But in all the museums, they showed Lucy with human-like feet.
Human feet.
But of course,
not
now
ape feet.
They've found more Australopithecines, and guess what kind of feet they have? 8 feet.
Is it 8 feet?
Yeah. So anyway, go to creation.com/apeman, and you'll get some more information there. How about natural selection? I mean, this is proof of evolution, right? We hear about all this in schools,
Look, animals change over time,
of course.
genetically from generation to generation. That's evolution.
Right, but of course, when you study it, natural selection itself is selecting from genetic information that's already there.
Yes.
So if it's already there, and you select this gene over this gene, obviously you're not evolving anything, because to turn one thing into another, you need accumulation of new information.
New stuff.
And that's why you'll get honest biologists saying, no, natural selection cannot evolve anything. So you can go to creation.com/muddywaters for more information why natural selection isn't proof of evolution.
And then people say, well, wait a minute, the new information comes from mutations. Mutations are the key that generate the new information.
Right.
Well, a lot of study has been done on mutations. And mutations, as the name implies, mutate things. They destroy things that are already there.
Right. Mutations are genetic spelling mistakes. Spelling mistakes when DNA is making copies of itself. So those chemical letters get swapped in and out or change. But spelling mistakes, that's like saying that if you start off with a simple book like, the Little Red Riding Hood, if you copy it enough times and make enough spelling mistakes, it's going to turn into the works of Shakespeare. It just doesn't work. Of course, there's beneficial mutations, things like beetles that lose their information for wings on a windy island, so that's a benefit to them because they don't blow it into the sea and die.
It's a survival benefit, but they've lost the ability to fly.
Right.
So it's a backward mutation, ultimately.
Exactly. So you can go to creation.com/evolutionsend and find out why mutations, rather than being a positive force for evolution, are actually a negative thing.
Yeah, it doesn't help either.
So stay tuned. We're going to look at more of this evidence in just a second.
What are the theological consequences of adding millions of years to Genesis? How does it impact doctrines such as the gospel, sin, the atonement? Refuting compromise is the most powerful biblical and scientific defense of a straightforward view of Genesis. Loaded with scientific support for a recent creation in 6 real days, it demolishes all attempts to twist the biblical text in order to insert millions of years, bringing clarity into an area usually mired in confusion. Must reading for Bible college students and anyone involved in church leadership or teaching. Get your copy at creation.com.
Okay, let's talk about one more evidence for evolution. The similarity, the genetic similarity between apes and humans. There's 99%, 98%, something like that, similarity in the DNA between apes and humans. You've likely all heard things like that before.
Seen them in museum signs.
Museum signs and read things like that in textbooks. But there was an article a little while ago, not by a creationist, called The Myth of 1%.
It was in Science magazine, very anti-creationist.
Right. And so that has now fallen by the wayside as well.
Right.
And there's more details on creation.com on that. You can see
massive
some of the
differences. They've actually found
Yes.
that the chimpanzee genome was 12% larger than the human genome.
Yeah,
So
if it's 12% larger, how can there be only 1% difference between the two? It doesn't make any sense.
Well, the thing is, evolutionists have admitted the myth of 1%. So
Yes.
if you've bought into that whole scenario, you can just go to creation.com/similarity myth, and you'll see why that doesn't work.
That's right.
Very well as well. Well, let's switch over here now, because what we can see is that when you really examine evolution, this so-called wall of evidence, and we've only got a limited amount of time here, and you can look into all sorts of things. This monolith is actually a big slag heap of really discarded evidences. The evolutionists keep coming up with stuff, and they're discarding it themselves. So you
New
can
discoveries
see,
prove them wrong.
Anyway, let's switch over to a newsworthy item. Despite the Bible's clear statements against homosexual behavior, there's a growing number of people that are saying, no, we need to accept this as real marriage unions.
Yeah, of Christians.
And there are Christians that are buying into this stuff too. And of course, the reason why it's important for our ministry, of course, is this really gets into the area of creation, right?
Yes, it's an issue of biblical authority, which is kind of the underlying focus of Creation Ministries International anyways.
Right.
We start with a Bible-first approach, obviously in creation. That's why we have the PhD scientists on board. And that pertains to every other area that the Scripture talks on, including the definition of marriage.
And Jesus, he made it very clear, when he said in Matthew 19:3-6, have you not read that he who created them from the beginning made them male and female, and this is the reason why a man will leave his mother and father, and so the biblical creation ordinance is between a man and a woman. That's very, very clear from Scripture. Now, we've been warning people for many years that if you accept evolution and millions of years because of what science says, why wouldn't you then look at other parts of the Scripture and try to modify that? And there's a clear example that we had on an article on our website. There's a fellow called Keith Mascord. He's a former lecturer at the Moore Theological College in Sydney, which was at one time this evangelical stronghold. And he came up with an article where he said some very interesting things.
Yeah, and this really illustrates the whole difficulty with if you throw Genesis out and you're weak on biblical authority, here's what it can lead to.
Right. He says in his article, beliefs must be tempered by facts, that if we look at the biblical texts, right, we look back on these texts, and maybe we need to reinterpret really what they're saying and where they're going, because he's talking about the story of Noah's Ark. And he says, well, whenever you look at it in the Bible, even Jesus referred to it as a real historical event.
That's right.
And then he goes on to say the big problem with this is that Noah's flood story was not factual. And that the only reason why the church no longer takes it as factual in most cases is because science has disproven that account. So obviously we don't believe in Noah's flood anymore. He says, well, now we need to do the same thing and overturn the plain and church history long reading of the biblical text regarding homosexual marriages. Wow. So you can see where it goes. So thanks for tuning in, and
see you next week.
time.